Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee, also known as the Peace Committee, for Monday, April 30th, 2018. My name is Councilmember Philippe Cunningham. I proudly represent the 4th Ward in North Minneapolis, and I am the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Council Members Cano, Schrader, Gordon, and Council Vice President Jenkins. Please let the record reflect we have a quorum. We have 7 items on our consent agenda for this meeting. The first is the reappointment of Commissioner of Health / Director of Health Department. We're going to be setting a public hearing for May 14th, 2018 to consider the reappointment by the Executive Committee of Gretchen Musicant to the appointed position of Commissioner of Health / Director of the Health Department for a 2-year term beginning January 2nd, 2018. Number 2, the grant from Minnesota Department of Human Services for tobacco compliance checks, accepting a grant from MDH services in the amount of $5,000 to conduct educational tobacco compliance check with retailers. 3 is a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health for home visiting services, accepting a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health for an amount not to exceed over $1.1 million over a 4 and 1 year half period to provide evidence-based home visiting to low-income women who are at risk for adverse health or birth incomes, and fatherhood advocacy training and case management. 4 is a data use agreement with Hennepin County for health data. This is authorizing an agreement between the City of Minneapolis through its Health Department and Hennepin County on behalf of its Human Services and Public Health Department for a merged limited data set in accordance with the signed data use agreements between the City and Hennepin County. 5 is cost share agreement for expanding the expansion of the Green Initiatives cost share program and agreement template modifications. 1, authorizing an expansion of the Green Business cost share program into the Green Initiatives cost share program, and authorizing modifications to the cost share funding agreement template for the Green Initiatives cost sharing program to reflect the program expansion in the agreements as approved by the City Attorney's Office. 6 is an amendment to Council Action number 2018A0206. There we go, named it. So we are correcting an error there in a previous council action. Number 7, we have 2018 Urban Scholars Program funding from partner organizations, accepting reimbursement dollars for an amount up to $88,000 from Urban Scholar partner organizations to cover professional services for Urban Scholars programming for the period of May 21st, 2018 through August 17th, 2018. Do any committee members have any questions? Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions. Just to comment on number 5 on the cost share, just to highlight this is a great program, and as we're increasing the franchise fee, it's businesses that have to pay some of that, and this is a great program to make sure that we're helping the businesses that are doing the right thing.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from my colleagues? I would like to also add some excitement to the cost sharing agreement, expanding that. It has been just for commercial businesses, and now it is available for residential areas as well. So really it's available to all property types that are within the city. And so this has been hugely successful with commercial businesses. So I'm excited to see it grow. And I would also like to take a moment to give a special shout out to the health department team who's responsible for bringing in that over $1.1 million in grants, because they are bringing in innovative home visiting work. So I just wanted to take a moment to give some information about the work that they're doing. So the Minneapolis Health Department will be using this grant to provide public health nurse home services to Minneapolis community members who are at risk for poor outcomes in maternal and newborn health. The focus is on families who are at high risk for childhood injury, prematurity, low birth weight, infant mortality, and child maltreatment, disproportionate rates of pregnancy, low maternal education, low income, and high unemployment. The department will be partnering with Minnesota Visiting Nurses Association and the Goodwill Easter Seals Father Project to deliver nurse home visiting services and fatherhood advocacy work. What's really exciting is about the expansion. Historically, when we talk about child and family health, we're talking about maternal and child health. And so what we're seeing here is that the Father's Home Visiting Pilot Project will include parent and child interaction and resources. An experienced case manager will assist the father advocate with gaining skills and learning approaches to effectively engage dozens of fathers. The father advocate will receive training on community outreach and recruitment, initial engagement, and assessment of father's life situation, strengths, resources, and barriers to be effectively involved in their child's life. So I just wanted to name that, because that's a lot of money that's being brought into the city. So thank you to the health department team for all their hard work, and also for constantly pushing and looking bigger and beyond where we currently are. So thank you so much for that work. So I just wanted to name that. Seeing no further questions, I move approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item is approved. So our first discussion item today is receiving and filing a presentation by the chair and members of the Minneapolis Community Environmental Advisory Commission, reviewing 2017 SEAC activities and 2018 work plan activities. So I am seeing Kelly and Erin Niehoff. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Nailed it. Chair of the commission will have a presentation, so I'm passing on over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Cunningham, council members. Thank you for having us. My name is Kelly Molman. I'm a sustainability program coordinator with the City of Minneapolis Sustainability Division, and I staff the Community Environmental Advisory Commission, or SEAC for short. So I'm here today with our SEAC Chair, Erin Niehoff, to present our annual update to City Council. So just a quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of SEAC, why it exists, who our members are, what the working groups are that do kind of all the work between meetings, during meetings, and then Erin is going to talk about some of our ongoing work. What is the group looking at now and planning for the future? So as background, this committee has existed since 1990, fairly long-standing commission. And its charge or obligation is to advise on the environmental consequences of city policies, programs, and projects with local and global impacts. So SEAC may suggest priorities for city policies, programs, and projects in accordance with criteria such as environmental urgency, scale of environmental impact, ease of implementation, costs, and benefits. And historically, this group has been very active in a number of different sustainability initiatives, including our former sustainability indicators prior to the city or community indicators, with the development of our climate action plan and its ongoing implementation around air and mercury reduction, through green building and green purchasing policies, and also starting to look at environmental justice through the Overburdened Communities Working Group. This is a list of our current membership. SEAC is made up of 19 members. The mayor and council each appoint 8 members, and so they each appoint 2 of resident members, technical experts, environmental advocates, and industries or companies having major impact on the environment. We also have 3 seats set aside for Minneapolis Public Schools, Hennepin County, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Currently, we are full as the commission, with the exception of the Minneapolis Public Schools, which has been a challenge for us in the past to find someone who is available and interested to participate in this commission. Some of the major activities from this last year, so SEAC being on a 2-year appointment process, like all of our boards and commissions, we are coming to the mid part of the 2nd year of our current roster. So this group had a lot of work that it did together last year. That included through climate and energy work. They began collaboration in stronger partnership with the Energy Vision Advisory Committee of the Clean Energy Partnership. They're also have started developing a platform around supporting electric vehicles within the city. The water subcommittee, or pool party as they prefer to be called, worked on expanding salt application training. They wrote an article on salt use that was put in the Ward 1 newsletter and followed updates on the state's salt liability bill. The Zero Waste Working Group worked closely with Councilmember Gordon's office on the Bring Your Own Bag ordinance, and when that came up for preemption through the state, worked on the amendments to that ordinance, or what recommended amendments would be. If we can no longer prohibit plastic bags, what would a reasonable fee be? The Overburdened Communities Working Group has provided a lot of input on the Green Zones initiative. They even, as a group, applied for a small grant, which we unfortunately didn't get, but around community engagement. And also submitted a comment letter on the VW settlement, the Volkswagen settlement funds last year. And then there has been a comprehensive plan task force, so a group of members from SEAC who have been looking at the comprehensive plan process and actually participated on the staff research team for environmental systems last year in creating the language for that plan, and continue to work on that. I'm going to hand it over to Erin to talk about our work going forward.
My turn. I'm Erin Niehoff. I'm a council-appointed resident appointment, and I happen to reside in Ward 2. So this year we have 3 main working groups, and the subgroups are based primarily on the commission's interest and those who are currently sitting on the commission. So currently we have the Energy and Climate Group, Water, Pool Party, and Zero Waste. We're working on coordinating with the Green Zones to see how we can help support them in what they come up with. But the Overburdened Community subgroup does not currently exist in SEAC. For the Energy and Climate subgroup, they're continuing to work
Ms.
on.
Niehoff, if I can actually jump in, I have a question from Councilmember Jenkins.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham and Ms. Niehoff. I feel like I misheard something. I heard a lot of reports about the Overburdened Committee, and then did you just state that it doesn't exist at this particular time, or?
So the subgroups within SEAC itself are kind of put together by the people who are on the commission, and right now there's nobody to really work on the Overburdened Communities subgroup like it existed, last year or the year before that.
Okay.
That said, though, for SEAC itself, while this isn't listed as a subgroup, we are looking more at how we do our work. Oftentimes, our priorities that we end up setting are set by the people who sit on the commission, which doesn't really seem very community focused, in my opinion. So we're trying to figure out some better ways for us to figure out what environmental issues really are at the forefront of the community's mind. So some of the things we've been talking about doing is having meetings within different wards to hear what community members have to say, to use that to help with setting our priorities. For example, the electric vehicle work that we've been doing, that's just something that as a committee, the Energy and Climate Group was really, really interested in doing. But that's not, the most pressing energy and climate issue that the city might be facing. So we're working on trying to figure out some better ways to be more community focused. And I will talk about that a little bit towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
So the Energy and Climate subgroup is working on electric vehicle policy and reviewing the city's green fleet policy. They've also did provide comments on the 100% renewable electricity resolution and have been working to advance climate action goals and been continuing to look at the franchise fee. For the water subcommittee, we've been participating in the water resources management plan. We are hoping to set up a meeting with key committees to discuss water topics and issues, looking more at stormwater BMPs within complete streets policy. And we're continuing to follow up on the Upper Harbor Terminal project, just seeing how the development plans are going with that to make sure that it does include green infrastructure, both for the health of the community, but also looking at how water itself moves from that site into the Mississippi. And then the zero waste subcommittee is looking at reintroduction of the bring your own bag ordinance, supported the expiration of the green to go cup exemption, looking at recycling and composting both at large residential and commercial facilities and what the city can do to push recycling and composting. And then we've been trying to work a little bit more with schools on recycling and composting too. So we're continuing to provide input for the 2040 comprehensive plan. We have been trying to figure out how we as a committee can advance conversations of racial equity and environmental justice. We are a very white commission right now. From my own perspective and how I see people, there's only one person of color on the commission of 18 people. So in terms of representing the city of Minneapolis, I don't know that it's necessarily doing a great job. But part of that too is some of the quotas that are set up within our enabling resolution. You know, we are only allowed to have 2 resident appointments from both the council and the mayor's office. That's less than a quarter of the makeup of the group. So one of the things that we've been doing quite strongly right now is looking at our enabling resolution to start figuring out what are some of the changes we can make so that we don't just become another white organization pushing environmental topics that don't necessarily make a difference where they're supposed to make a difference. We did have a conversation from iMatter that started making us think more about youth appointments too. As a commission, there is quite a dichotomy between young professionals who don't yet have families and then older working professionals whose children have left. It's hard, especially as a commission that only meets once a month at a time when people have childcare issues, to come and participate in that. So that's something that we're also talking about a little bit. There are a lot of things that we're working on doing right now, not necessarily within SEAC time, also outside of SEAC time. We have been having more detailed conversations inside SEAC about what our purpose is, how people feel during meetings, and about how we can make the space be more inclusive. I did notice when I started as chair of SEAC that while there have been some people of color on the commission before, they've left and moved on. While there are still some people who are white who have stayed on the commission. And I just noticed a pattern that the people who tend to leave tend to be the people of color, and trying to work on how to change that while being a white woman. So it's definitely something that is in the forefront of our minds. We spent 45 minutes at the last meeting talking about how to make our meetings feel more inclusive. And at this next meeting, we're going to be talking more about group norms. I forget what else we said, but our plan is to have some suggested changes to our enabling resolution by the September meeting, and in the hopes that those can be implemented when committee selection starts in the fall.
Great. I have a question here from Councilmember Gordon.
And it's also a comment. I really appreciate that you're focusing on this and taking a look at it. And I think it probably does make some sense to review things. And I guess having all those technical experts kind of limits the potential field. I'm just curious if you've reached out to our division of equity, racial equity, and had Joy come in and talk to you about it or anything like that. That might be an idea to look at, getting some advice and some input from them.
I personally have not. Did you want to come back up here at all? We've been sort of tag teaming this effort because this is not my job, but I do feel very strongly about it. When I ran to be chair this year, it was not something that I was thinking about, but at the meeting where I was elected, we had a group of students from MCTC who are working on community organizing, like that's their major, come and sit in on our class, and just seeing the distinct difference between who was sitting at the table versus those who were sitting behind us. And then being asked about, like, why aren't we working on overburdened communities, made me want to work on this issue of racial equity, especially as it relates to environmental work, more closely.
Well, the other thing also is our neighborhood and community relations department, which would have a lot of ideas too. So the head nodding is enough for me to know that if you haven't already been coordinating, this might be a good opportunity to do that and see if they might have some ideas and suggestions about how to restructure the group.
That
I'm
sounds
also
great.
really excited about having some youth seats designated on some of our boards and commissions,
Mhm.
even if it's 24 or under. I think we could make the case that it might be worth doing that in and of itself. And if one, not to sway your group, but I mean, even if one commission and advisory group came forward and wanted to try it out or something
Mhm.
like that, I think that would give us an opportunity to see how it would work and be good. So this is exciting stuff, and thanks for spending some time on it.
I don't mind. I don't know if I can add in another comment or two at all.
Yes, please go ahead.
But I did want to mention too, like so far I haven't reached out to other offices, mostly because I don't know everything that does exist here in the city. Kelly's been really, really helpful with that. One thing that I have been doing though is reaching out to some of the people of color who used to sit on SEAC and having one-on-one conversations with them about what some of their suggestions are, how they feel like it can be improved and what we can do better in the future. So that's mostly the way that I've been going at this point.
Thank you. And would you like to continue?
Nope.
Is that it?
Just one more comment, I guess, was that what
Oh.
I had, not multiple.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
And so that's the end?
That is the
Oh,
end.
great. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other questions from my colleagues? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions, I move to receive and file this item. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item is received and filed. Thank you so much. Our next discussion item is receiving and filing a presentation on the Southside and Northside green zones since the City Council adoption in April 2017. Welcoming Kelly back to the podium to begin this presentation. Take it away, Kelly.
Hello again, Chair, Council members. I'm still Kelly Molman with the Sustainability Division. So I've been asked by Chair Cunningham to provide an update on the work of the Green Zone Initiative. And I want to be clear that this is just a brief update. We're not asking for any council action at this time. So what is a green zone? Many of you, but not all of you, were here for this beginning of this, and just wanted to start by offering the definition. So how the city of Minneapolis looks at it is as a place-based policy initiative aimed at improving the health and supporting economic development or well-being using environmentally conscious efforts in communities that face the cumulative effects of environmental pollution, as well as social, political, and economic vulnerability. We're really talking about our environmental justice communities and how we really authentically work with them to improve not only the environmental conditions, but also that support their health and economic well-being. This initiative started within the city in 2013 while we were developing our climate action plan. A group of environmental justice advocates came to the city asking to participate because they had not been invited to the table thus far, and recommended that the green zones be a strategy introduced into the climate action plan, among many other recommendations that were adopted. In 2016, City Council established the Green Zone Work Group, and this was a citywide group that was looking at developing the citywide framework for how we really start this work. From their recommendations, almost exactly a year ago, in April of 2017, the Northside and Southside Green Zone areas were adopted. So from that 2017 work, these were the larger framework or goals that Green Zone Work Group came up with centering equity and preventing gentrification at the core of the work, with the broader environmental focus areas surrounding that. One of what was set forth for that group to work on was to come up with designation criteria as well. And so this is all of the data that we use to pull together to really establish a baseline of where we were related to those goals that they recommended. When we overlaid all of that data together, this is what came forward, really identifying 2 areas of the city that would most benefit from being designated as green zones. So from that is where City Council made the designation of the Northside and Southside Green Zone. In May of last year, we received funding from the McKnight Foundation and the Funders Network nationally, and we're directed to use these resources to support the Southside Green Zone Task Force. So in October, that task force was established, and we were able to hire facilitators to help us with that initiative. In November of this past year, working with Councilmember Gordon and others within the city, we were able to approach the Community Action Partnership of Hennepin County for resources to support the Northern Green Zone through the Northern Metals Advisory Committee. So I'll talk more about that in just a bit. So you see these dotted lines here, kind of like what's coming next. So we'll be wrapping up, or I should say, so we'll be kicking off the Northern Metals Advisory Committee in May. I've seen emails circulating around the timing for that, and then bringing the Green Zone work plan for the South Side back to Council for approval in June or July. Just as a reminder, these are the boundaries of the Southside Green Zone. So it includes the 4 Phillips neighborhoods and most of Cedar Riverside. These are our Southside Task Force members. These portraits were done by Mike Hoyt and Whit Ciasco. We're really happy with this, and we've created sort of a profile of our task force members for them to, as one way to get to know each other. The charge of the Southside Task Force is here in front of you. It's really to develop an action-oriented work plan for the Southside Green Zone. And we are looking in this work plan to identify actions that really go to the core of what a green zone is, promoting the health and economic well-being using environmentally beneficial strategies. We want to get a lot out of any one of these strategies. So the task force has been meeting more than monthly since October to come up with these recommendations. The other thing that I'll mention here is at the bottom, so we're saying within the broader Green Zone Initiative, recognizing that the city plays a role, has a part in this, but there's broader community work that's happening outside of what our municipal activities are. And so the Southside Green Zone Task Force is really focused on directing the city's work and what the recommendations are for how the city should be a partner or play a role in the broader community work on the Southside Green Zone. These are the 4 areas that are coming out of our action plan or the work plan. And I just want to say, related to the conversation that happened at the City Council Housing Study Session last week, Green Zones has been spending months thinking about how to define a healthy and thriving community, which is a comment that came out of that meeting last week, and thinking about what are the metrics or the characteristics that define a healthy and thriving community. How do we prevent gentrification and center equity? So we do have groups of community members and staff coming together and having conversations around those questions that were raised by council last week. I'm not going to get into any of the specific recommendations within these areas because they haven't been adopted yet by the group, but I will be bringing those forward with the task force in the coming months. I want to note how important having the resources for this work has been. We were able to hire LaCroix DeLune Consulting to facilitate the task force meetings. Not only have they been fabulous facilitators, but they have really helped us kind of craft this work and make it and enable it to move forward from meeting to meeting. We're asking a lot out of our task force members. We keep hearing about how rushed the work is. There's so much coming in front of them every month. They have less than a year to tackle all of those topics that you saw before. And a lot of that is bringing them up to speed on what's happening. So we've had staff from different departments coming in to present and provide information, answer their questions so that they can make their smart recommendations coming out of that. But you just kind of get started diving into one topic and then we switch the topic on them. So that everyone has really taken on a lot. And I just want to recognize the importance of having those facilitators there to help work as a team. And then in addition to the facilitation consultants, we have brought on Hope Community and Land Stewardship Project to help us with community engagement. As a group, including myself, the 6 of us operate as what we call the design team. And we meet at least once every 2 weeks to talk about how we're going to set up the next meeting, how the community engagement information gets brought into that work. The community input at the meetings and the events that Hope and LSP are hosting are the direct words that get crafted and put into the work plan. And the task force gets to chew on them, but really everything is brought in. This work is created by the task force, by the community members. It's not content from staff being brought to this group. This group is writing every single word of what's being developed so far. So that's my update for the south side. On the north side, so I've been getting a lot of questions about this because it's been a much less visible effort thus far. When the green zone areas were adopted last year, we also knew that there was interest from council to establish a Northern Metals Advisory Committee. With the two areas being almost essentially the same geographically, it felt that it would be challenging to have two groups, both from a staff capacity and also there'd be interests that would overlap from the groups, and it'd be hard to kind of differentiate what gets handled in one group versus the other because their interests were so overlapping. So what we're doing going forward is with these resources from Community Action Partnership of Hennepin County, they're able to hire folks from the Public Policy Project and EJCC, which is a recently formed environmental justice group up on the north side, to facilitate and do engagement around the Northern Metals Advisory Committee and then also the Northside Green Zone. And this funding is for a period of 2 years. So we're now figuring out with the consultant and the health department and sustainability how that works gets timed out. So starting with the Northern Metals Advisory Committee kind of kicking off and starting to wrestle with how to spend the $600,000 from the Northern Metals consent decree, and then what does it look like to move into the broader topics of the Northside Green Zone. So I don't have all the answers for you now, but we're being very intentional about how we think through that process and make sure that it makes sense for community and fits within the capacity that staff have. From there, I will take any questions.
Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Councilmember Gordon.
I don't. I just wanted to acknowledge the great work that's gone into this. I guess I did have a question. Who sketched the portraits of the consultants there? Because that was a unique way to present some information to us that I found valuable.
Yeah, so the idea for that came from one of our consultants, facilitators, Atande, and she thought, this would be a really good thing to get folks to know each other. So in addition to having the portraits, we have a little information about them. It's almost like a written Facebook for our task force members, and it was done by Mike Hoyt and Whit Siasco.
Nice. Nice. Well, I really am impressed with the Southside Green Zone and how it's gone so far. I think this could really be a model for others to follow. I also think it's wonderful that you're presenting this at the same time where we had the presentation with SEAC, because I think a lot of what this is what SEAC was helping guide us towards last year. And I'm excited to hear about more progress on the Northside Green Zone as things move ahead. And I'm glad we have some resources so we can also get some assistance there.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do think that this is a very avant-garde type of project. There's not a lot of cities across the nation that have done what we've set out to do. And I believe that the articulation around addressing gentrification in conjunction with a anti-environmental racism program is also pretty dynamic and probably new at that level of kind of community development and environmental justice work. So a lot of times, a lot of the turbulence that we see around these policy initiatives and directives on the council are a reflection of the fact that we're kind of charting new territory and we're kind of opening up a lot of opportunities for people in ways that haven't been done before. So I think this is going to be an extremely important project for the city, not only for the benefit of our residents and making sure that our city is growing in an equitable way and a sustainable way, but I also see it as adding to the national conversation and discourse around these kinds of projects. So I'm curious if you have some specific examples about what has been identified as I guess strategies or efforts that the city will take on under the green zones to limit or mitigate the displacement that could be triggered by phasing out industrial pollution and phasing in green jobs and phasing in environmentally friendly development, which is, I think, something that a lot of younger families, younger populations are kind of coalescing around, and certainly looking at ways to create a dynamic city that's attractive to people, where people want to live. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the if there has been, some ideas or things put on the table about how we can address that issue of displacement and increasing rents and increasing tax base with reinvesting in a neighborhood that has been kind of underinvested in over time.
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Cano, absolutely, and that has been the center of every conversation of this task force. Some of the ideas are ones that you have already heard of through other avenues, and it's related to housing costs and how do we hold landlords in particular accountable, but how do we also create more opportunities and more unique opportunities for ownership. So whether that's through cooperative models, more land, there's been a lot of conversation around land trusts. And I think one of the challenging dynamics of this group is the strong interest in healthy food access and the ability to garden within community and having that land access, but also understanding the need for and demand for affordable housing. And you can't build, you could maybe put a rooftop garden on a development, but you can't necessarily have both all the time. And so this group has also been wrestling with the tensions of their own interests. And I think to the other point of just the broader gentrification, how do we make improvements in the community without causing displacement, is really focusing on investing in the existing residents and businesses rather than creating land or opportunities that are of interest to other developments coming in. So it may be a slower, but hopefully more organic process. And I look to the leadership of the city to help us in figuring out how do we do that very intentionally and very much focused on putting the resources back in the community.
Yeah, and I get a lot of comments about that in relation to the city's development project at the old Roof Depot site. And there's always the question of like, well, how does this fit in with green zones? How does this fit in with green zones? So I think we have to smooth that out and figure out how that connection becomes more organic and more integrated. Aside from that, I'm curious, it seems to me like successful green zone efforts include anchor institutions and organizations, include corporate interests and maybe university-based research and sort of like this coalition of maybe unlikely allies coming together to really solidify and implement that coordinated development strategy that's grounded on environmental justice. Is there a conversation about that here with the green zones? Like, are we thinking that this is going to be like a package deal where the city brings in some, big job, I don't know, groups, and then we, unify with get together with some unions? Like, what does that kind of, I guess, implementation look like long term? If we're talking 3 years, 5 years, I'm not even sure.
Yeah. So, Chair, council members, we're not quite at the point of having recommendations as detailed as that. What I can say is we are bringing in some of those institutional partners, such as Abbott Northwestern Hospital has been very involved in attending our meetings and open to talking about how can they be better. They're very interested in being part of the neighborhood. They're kind of smack dab in the middle of the green zone. We've also had participation from folks from the MINTAP program, the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program at the U. They do a lot of, putting researchers and students into different industries and businesses to figure out how they might reduce their environmental impact. So Smith Foundry had an intern last year looking at some of those potential improvements. There's so much activity going on, particularly with those organizations and community that have been there for years and have been mobilizing, that part of it is just like getting a grasp on all of the work that's already happening and how do we coordinate better and support some of that work that's on the ground. I don't have a completely clear answer for you at this time.
It's great that you're engaging Abbott, and I think if we could, figure out ways that the council and the city as a whole our weight can be brought forward to kind of help solidify some more of those partnerships. I think long term, it'd be really good to try to accelerate the work of green zones by, creating this coalition that can come together to really sustain and support the community-driven vision that is being put forward. So thank you so much for all your work. This is really cool.
Thank you.
Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. I just wanted to comment how great a job you guys did in terms of bringing together a broad voice of the community to advise around green zones. And that might be an opportunity to look for advice for SEAC and trying to bring some more diverse voices into that. There's also an organization called Nexus Community Partners, which operates a board and commissions leadership institute. And I would encourage you guys to look to them for graduates from their program. I mean, they are really trying to place their graduates in these types of commissions and boards to be able to bring the voice of equity and inclusion to these, I think it was referred to, all white bodies. So just some thoughts for you as you continue your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President. And now we also have Councilmember Gordon.
I thought of another issue or question as the discussion was going onward. And it has to do with resources for the green zones, and it has to do with the budget this year. And is there a sense that there will be some things that might relate to the city budget? Are departments involved in this and engaged and trying to get a handle on how they might do that? I know one of the intentions always was we would start prioritizing resources for the green zones. And that's why we work so hard identifying where we think they should go. Are those discussions going on, and you think it's feeding into the mayor's proposed budget as it will be coming forward?
Yeah, so Chair, Council Member, absolutely. And right now the task force is going through a prioritization process. They have over 100 action items that they've developed as urgent needs. Obviously, we can't necessarily take all of those on. So we're in a process of identifying which of those are already active. Many of the things they didn't know that the city was already working on or that another organization was already working on. So we have to mark, okay, that one's active. Maybe it needs some additional resources. Maybe it's good as it is. We just need to increase awareness of it. Maybe it's a brand new thing. Some of the ideas coming out of the equity anti-displacement work is really about process and how the city engages, and when the city comes into a community and does work, particularly these communities, are the staff trained? Do they have the support that they need? Do we have the time that we need to work more at the community scale? So those are a lot of what's coming forward. And in terms of identifying what resources that we would need with that, it's really going to depend on what the top priorities are that come forward. But we are very conscious of the budget conversations coming up shortly, and we'll have more answers for you.
All right, well, I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions here. So you had mentioned a particular interest in fresh food. And so I was wondering what does the relationship look like, if any, with the Minneapolis Food Council? How does that fit into this?
Yeah, Chair Cunningham, we're trying to unite it as much as possible. So I sit next to Tamara, who staffs the Food Council, and have been in communication with her about how can this work really support what's coming out of the Food Council. Many of the Food Council members and the activities that they do are already working in the green zones. I think a lot of Tamara's work on local food systems generally is a great example of how we can do our work in the city better within these communities. And identifying their needs and working with community partners. So we're really kind of looking to the Food Council to help shape what the recommendations are and hope that they are supportive of Food Council recommendations.
Great, thank you. And so I actually live in the Northside Green Zone, and my neighborhood is included, and in our neighborhood is Upper Harbor Terminal. Now, granted, there's a line, there's the highway that divides it, but I'm just curious. I mean, McKinley neighborhood is included. Upper Harbor Terminal is technically in McKinley. How does that development fit into the Northside, with the work the Northside Green Zone work is going to be doing?
Chair, I have met with Ann Calvert, who staffs that process on the city side, and we've had some conversations about how that works. I think it really is hard to say since I've been spending most of this last year focused on the Southside Green Zone, and we're just kind of rolling out the North Side efforts, what exactly that looks like. So I don't have a great answer for you on that. It's such a huge development, and I know that the city is interested in it being sort of even like potentially a nationally recognized space that would draw people from all over to come and see the city. So how that meets community needs, I think, is a great tension. And I think there have been some great residents and organizations on the north side who have been advocating and asking those appropriate questions. So hopefully we can support them in this work.
Great. I would love to see this work connected to Upper Harbor Terminal as it's in my ward. I'm really happy to hear that SEAC is doing some specific work around it, but also just thinking, beyond water, just the overall picture of how does this connect to those outcomes and those priorities that were mentioned for the framework. I think that would be very helpful to have that laid over the Upper Harbor Terminal development, and that's a part of the conversation after the Northern Metals piece, but really being able to make sure that this massive development that takes place really is in benefit of the community in multiple ways. So thank you very much. Do I have any other questions from my colleagues? Seeing no further questions, I move to receive and file this item. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item is received and filed. Thank you very much, Kelly. Our third discussion item is receiving and filing the Contract Compliance Division 2017 fourth quarter report and annual summary. Sean Screeby, did I say that right? What is it?
No, Mr. Chair, you did not. That's all right.
How do you say it?
It's Sean Skibby.
Skibby. He is here with the Civil Rights Contract Compliance Division, and he will be giving us our presentation. Mr. Skibby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick second, I'll get set here. This is actually my first time presenting in front of this committee. I have worked with each of you individually, though, so it's been a pleasure so far. I look forward to continuing the term together. My name is Sean Skibby. I'm the director of the Contract Compliance Division. Just a little bit of a background on the presentation I'll be giving today. It's actually an amended format a bit because there was an amendment to the ordinance last year about our reporting requirements. So instead of reporting every quarter, as we were required to do before, we're now reporting annually. And so this is something that we'll be doing moving forward. This is actually a report for the fourth quarter of 2017, where we'd be covering the entire year anyway, but just something moving forward to be aware of. Part of the reason for that is we have a data portal that we've been working on through Tableau, through the city software, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. Just a quick overview of the Contract Compliance Division and the work we do. I think it can really be tied into two primary prongs. The first is really around the idea of sort of the rising tide to lift all boats. Those include our prevailing wage ordinance, where we require essentially a minimum wage to be paid on all city construction contracts that vary by trade and project, but the idea is that everybody on that project is entitled to the requirements of that ordinance. And then the other part of it is a more targeted approach at direct programs that are designed to address some of the historical discrimination that's taken place both along racial and gender lines. And those are primarily around business inclusion, which is the city's small and underutilized business program, also Section 3, and then also around workforce inclusion. So I'll talk about some of those, what our outcomes are for 2017, and I'll give you guys an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So the first topic, again, is small and underutilized business program, or minority and women business inclusion. So just some basic numbers for you guys. We had 186 projects or contracts reviewed for goals in 2017. Of those, we had 64 pre-award reviews conducted. When we're doing those pre-award reviews, what we're looking for is essentially asking whether contractors either met the SUBP goals in the contract or demonstrated good faith efforts. Of those 64, 37 did commit to meeting the goals. 27 did not meet the goals, and of those 27, 20 were approved for their good faith efforts, and 7 were not approved and were denied contracts with the city. And then the other part of what we do on the small and underutilized business program, or another part of what we do, is certification. And in 2017, we certified 16 firms to the SUBP program.
If I can jump in with a quick question on that, was there a goal that was set for that, or was it, was there a number that you all were aiming for to get certified last year?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The city actually works as part of a collaborative, the Minnesota Unified Certification Program, and that includes the Met Council, City of Minneapolis, MnDOT. There was no goal for the city as a whole. I could get you numbers for the certifications that took place across all of the Minnesota Unified Certification Program partners for 2017.
That's cool. I was just wondering if there was a goal or not.
Okay.
Thanks.
No, Mr. Chair, thank you. So first, 4-year summary of the business inclusion outcomes under small and underutilized business program. There were a total of 172 construction projects totaling $645 million. 7 and 8% are the averages for MBEs and WBEs across that time. And if you look at these outcomes, so that's 42.7 million for minority business enterprises, 50.7 million for women-owned businesses. So what that comes out to in the actual dollars. The percentages for 2017 were 6% for MBE and 5% for WBE. So I'm going to shift now and talk about workforce inclusion. This is essentially the labor force on city construction contracts. So we talked a little bit about the business side. This is the employee side. So again, this is a 4-year summary in comparison on closed projects during each of these years. So over that time, the 4-year summary, there were over 4 million total project hours. There were employee hours worked. During that time, 202,764 hours, or 5%, were performed by females, and 840,938 were performed by minorities, so 21% in that field. This one, for 2017, we were at 4% female and 24% minority. One quick caveat, or one quick addition to these numbers: in July of 2017, the Department of Human Rights actually implemented new goals for the region. They remained at 32% on the minority side, but they actually jumped up to 20% on the female side. And so we brought that forward around the same time period last year to this council, and it was approved to be effective in October of last year. And so some of the increases that we've seen on the minority side, we're hoping to see continue on the female side as well moving forward. Additional compliance areas that we work in: affirmative action plans. We require every contractor doing business with the city on a contract over $100,000 to have an approved affirmative action plan on file with the city. We reviewed and approved 147 in 2017. In addition, there's the HUD Section 3 program. We processed and approved 3 Section 3 resident applications and 3 Section 3 business applications as well. And then on the prevailing wage side, we recovered $12,537 for 26 workers on 12 projects for the city. Regarding the reporting that I talked about earlier and the data portal, I got some information that this is currently in the final stages of approval. So this portal is actually built, it's ready, and it'll be giving real-time data on projects that the division has closed, and so it will be available to the public. Obviously, of course, available to the council and anyone that wishes to look at that. So we look forward to that enhanced reporting as well. And that is something that we should have approved very soon. Mr. Chair, I've just been given information that I can actually provide a demonstration. So I'll take him up on that invitation. One moment. So this is the dashboard essentially, and it just gives real-time data about projects that the division has closed, and it offers a variety of ways to look at the data. One of them is, of course, what you see before you in a map where you can just hover and you can look at specific projects that the city has monitored and reviewed. And this just really gives you a project by project layout of how that particular project performed. So there are several that are available. It's basically every project that we've worked on over the last several years and that we've closed. And there's a lot of data there. You can see some of our projects, how they performed, and as well as some of our progress. So
If you could pause, Mr. Skibby, we have
Sure.
a question from Councilmember Gordon.
Just curious about what the colors mean. Does that correspond to the project hours over there? Or? Oh, there. Thank you.
yep,
I see now.
yeah, it's just by department, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Gordon.
So why don't we have more women businesses? That was a very discouraging chart when we saw. I think we went back, we saw we had 12% women-owned business participation in 2014, and then it just keeps stepping downward. Could you please reverse that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, yes, thank you for that question. I certainly noticed that as well. One quick caveat with that, and I agree with the downward trend. However, I would note just a quick caveat with our reporting requirements. We do report here on projects where we set a goal. And so I have personally been more intentional about setting a goal on a contract, even if it's a really small goal. I've set a couple of goals that were 1%. Actually, a couple of the good faith efforts I denied were 1% goals. And so that potentially can have the effect of weighing down these numbers when we report on the projects where we actually set a goal, because if they actually meet the goal, they're coming in at 1 to 4%, and they look lower than the city's outcomes as a whole. One of the things that gives me some comfort with this is the outcomes from the recent disparity study, which gave much different numbers and showed, I think, total participation of around 20.19%, at least in one sector of the city contracting market, and numbers that generally just look very different than SUBP. So it is true that minority-owned businesses actually do a little bit better on city contracts. That's actually a bit of an anomaly that the city of Minneapolis has. I think that's probably because we do a two-pronged approach where we set a minority business goal and a women-owned business goal on each contract. I hope that context helps, but yeah, I do agree that generally we want that trend to be in a different direction, and hopefully, holistically, the disparity study and other numbers will continue to show that.
I think that is helpful, and maybe some of those 16 new certified businesses are women-owned businesses too, so I think that will help if we get more in the mix.
Great, thank you. I have a question. So I had asked earlier about specific goals, and I was wondering now, with the disparity study, will there be space now to set goals like we want to have at least 20 or 25 per year of new certified MBEs or WBEs, or we want to reach 25% women participation or something of the sort? Are we going to, now that we have those numbers and baselines, is it possible for us as a city to explore setting goals that we aim towards?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and members of the committee, I think that certainly is possible. One of the things I will talk about that we'll mention that we did a lot of work on in 2017 was the Governor Dayton had an initiative to do the small business contracting portal, and so that actually combines certification for small businesses. Small businesses can now apply through the targeted group business, Veterans Preference Program, which are state certification programs. There's the CERT program through the City of St. Paul, and then there's the Minnesota Unified Certification Program. So firms applying for certification can now apply through all three of those programs at once, and that's an opportunity to increase that certification pool as well. But yes, we can certainly review implementing goals for the number of certified firms in 2018 and beyond as well.
Great. We'll talk more about that offline so we can kind of figure out what that might look like. So awesome. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right. Thank you very much. Is that all for your presentation?
That's it. Thank you.
Well, you nailed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
With no further questions, I would like to make the motion to receive and file this item. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. And our fourth and final discussion item of this meeting is receiving and filing a presentation on Super Bowl 52, right? It's 52? From Sports Ball, yes. From the Minneapolis Health Department / Environmental Health Division. Dan Huff, Director of Environmental Health, will begin the presentation. Mr. Huff, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham, council members, and I want to welcome my colleagues. They're the real reason that we're presenting today a successful operation. These are folks that are your health inspectors in the city. As you know, we had a Super Bowl here in town, and wanted to talk about how environmental health worked with our restaurants and our hotels to make sure we had a successful event. We had a two-part mission. Our first part was food safety. That's what we think of as health inspectors. We're checking temperatures. We're telling people to wash their hands. But we also worked on food defense. And food defense is a newer line of work for us. And this is preventing intentional tampering, adulteration, and terrorism within our food supply. This was, in working with the FDA and the FBI, we really put a lot of resources into this. And as far as we know, we're the first local health department to tackle this and really ensure good food defense measures were in place for an event such as the Super Bowl. Give you a little background on our food system in the United States. At every step of the way, from farm to table, different agencies, whether they be federal, state, or local, will inspect food until it gets into the consumer's hands. And at that final step, which is our retail establishments, restaurants, food, trucks, that's where we come in. That's what we inspect here in Minneapolis and our sister jurisdictions within the state of Minnesota. In order to do this operation, which really was a metro-wide operation, working with federal, state, and local partners, we had to do a lot of planning and a lot of coordination to ensure that we had a seamless operation. I want to talk a little bit about how we changed, even how we approach our work with this. Here's Eduardo, or Dr. Madonez. He's one of our happy food inspectors here. Our routine food inspections, day to day, it's a lot like an annual physical. We go into an establishment, we look at everything, we write a report, and we say, work on these things, and we'll be back in a year. Just like your doctor says, lose weight, exercise more, come back and see me next year. Well, for a high security event like this, we adopted the FDA's procedure, which they use for things such as the Olympics or the presidential inauguration. And instead of just coming in, writing a report, and leaving, we're a lot more like a personal trainer. Yes, that is Eduardo on the right as well as the left as the personal trainer there. We actually, if someone is having trouble with maintaining temperature, we say, okay, where are you in your process? Let's heat the food back up. We're going to help you cool it properly so that you can serve it as opposed to having to toss it. It's day-by-day coaching with our establishments. This is really important because so many of our local vendors were able to participate in the Super Bowl. It's a big difference when I sell, my ware at maybe a festival and I may have a few hundred customers, to where I'm going to be at the NFL tailgate and I'm serving 11,000 people for one meal. We work very closely with our local operators. In fact, we did day-by-day inspections as they were preparing the food every step of the way, coaching them through it. In order to do this, we had to do a lot of training. The FDA trained all of our metro-wide health inspectors. About 100 health inspectors were trained in this process of food flow inspections. Obviously, we had a lot of meetings. And we also worked on common documents so that Bloomington and Hennepin County, when they inspected as part of this operation, used the same inspection form that we did. We just put our logo on it as opposed to theirs. So that we had common documents, common platform. This is really important because, as you might imagine, people move across boundaries when selling food. We also did a lot of work on food defense. We developed new protocols. What do we do if an inspector sees something that is suspicious? We developed pocket cards outlining here are the steps you take. And we're very fortunate to have partners such as the Food Protection and Defense Institute, which is at the U of M. And they worked with us, with the FBI and Minnesota Department of Health, to generate some tabletops. We had a tabletop at the U.S. Bank. We had a tabletop at the Convention Center. And what we do is we sit around with the staff, both the Convention Center staff, catering staff, emergency personnel, and the U led us through a number of scenarios and what would happen if the food supply had been tampered intentionally. Very helpful for our preparations. We also looked at a lot of other things. Because health inspectors are in board and lodging and hotels, we trained on human trafficking. And this was a metro-wide effort with Washington County, Bloomington, Minneapolis, Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, where about 80 regional inspectors were trained on the signs of human trafficking. We also worked on food donation. There's a myth out there that the health department won't let people donate used food or leftover food, and that's not true. We just have to do it correctly. So we worked with Hennepin County, developed protocols, and from our survey, about 40% of our vendors did donate leftover food, which is good for our waste stream, but also those who need to eat. A lot of things took place even before January. One was intensive focus on U.S. Bank Stadium. We did 7 sweep inspections starting in September. A sweep inspection is where we have 6 to 8 inspectors go during a game day or a concert and inspect every one of the 150 food establishments within the stadium. And we work closely with Aramark, who is the caterer there, or the food provider, to ensure that the U.S. Bank Stadium operations were top-notch. We also did a lot of training. We trained over 1,000 food workers, free training, who were going to be either handling or serving food during the Super Bowl events. A lot of our work went into identifying and tracking vendors. We had a lot of vendors. We had 8 NFL-sanctioned events that were in Minneapolis, plus about 150 private events, these private parties. And what we did with each one of our vendors is we actually did a site visit with them, and we did an interview with them. And we had them fill out a form, and we talked about things such as food safety. We talked about food defense and talked about how our process is going to work. Considering that it's a metro-wide effort, everybody used this form. Hennepin County would follow up on a vendor who would be serving at the U.S. Bank Stadium if it was in their jurisdiction. Once they had that form filled out and done the interview, they'd pass it to us. We had this seamless, as if we were almost one agency. It was really a wonderful partnership. The USDA, Food and Safety Inspection Service, went into the manufacturing facilities and processing facilities that would be serving meat and eggs to these events, and actually did sampling, looking for bioterrorism agents as well as specific pathogens. So the hot dogs at the U.S. Bank Stadium had been sampled. Now, unfortunately, the first couple weeks of January, we had, this is what we deal with in the health department, norovirus. We had 4 outbreaks, all at large establishments with a lot of staff. So 100, 150 people on staff. And we had more noro outbreaks in the first 2 weeks of January than we normally get in a whole season. That means it was out there. It's extremely contagious. It is often spread by food workers. And we wanted to make sure it did not interfere with the Super Bowl. So to that end, we did a lot of education. We took a day where every health inspector just blanketed downtown, met with bars, met with restaurants, talked about norovirus, talked about human trafficking, talked about different educational resources we have, worked on our newsletters, really got the word out there that, hey, norovirus is out there and we got to stop it. Outdoor vendors. You know, we have about 450 outdoor events every year that we inspect for food, but most of those are not in the winter. And we've never had an outdoor festival in the winter that goes for 10 days long. And as you know, it's cold and water freezes normally in Minnesota in the winter. Well, water's pretty important for health inspections because we got to wash things, wash hands. So we worked with the vendor on Nicollet Avenue to make sure that they had water everywhere they had vendors. So we had large 500-gallon containers of water, almost like old depots of water all along. And we worked with our food trucks to make sure that they were winterized or had a water plan. Oops. We got mutual aid with Hennepin and Anoka counties. We had 8 inspectors from Hennepin and 1 from Anoka join us for this operation. Extremely helpful. And the partners we had here were just phenomenal. Then we got into it. This is our Department Operations Center. Every one of those folders represents one of the places that we were doing food float inspections. That's every day, twice a day. It's a lot of places. And we had just a great team there. Our H-Stock operated, usually opened about 7 in the morning. The latest we ran was 2:30 in the morning because people like to eat late. Overall, we had 31 health inspectors working on this. The FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, were incredibly good partners. We had one of the local FDA staff who worked with us every step of the way. He was here every day for the 10 days, went out with inspectors. He was our technical advisor. We could ask him questions. He worked us through things. And he was a great resource because he literally was in charge of the food safety for the presidential inauguration. So really high caliber. We also were at our MAC. And the great thing about the MAC was we were able to talk metro-wide with whatever is happening. If there was a road issue, if there was a transportation issue, a law enforcement issue. And every day we had a call with all of our partners to talk about, hey, did you have that vendor in Hennepin County? What happened? Did they come here? Where are we? We literally had one vendor that was discovered by a Maplewood inspector riding her bike. I don't know why she was riding her bike in January, but we're all for it. And saw a kitchen that she knows is normally vacant in the wintertime because it's a golf course, fully operational. Found out they were serving during one of the events. So she sat there and watched them do the whole thing. Great partnership here, staffing our MAC. One of the things that we paid special attention to was protecting the food supply for those who protect us, our first responders. You may have seen that in the Korean Olympics. There was an article, a couple articles the day after the Super Bowl. The security forces at the Olympics came down with norovirus from the food. It ended up 300 of them got norovirus. South Korea brought in the army to provide security for the Olympics. That did not happen here. We were very intentional, working with our law enforcement partners. Everything that a police officer ate during this event was inspected by one of our staff. We worked, as you know, all of our hotels were booked. A lot of great fancy events happening at our downtown hotels. And we were definitely on hand there. That's Graham, one of our inspectors. The convention center, the Super Bowl experience. Probably the biggest thing that happened during the entire period was that the Roosevelt Drumline played at the convention center. And I know that because my son's in the Roosevelt Drumline. So a lot of things happening there every day. And the convention center, I got to hand it to Jeff Johnson and Calvert Catering. Amazing work that team did. Well done. Very good operation there. Nicollet Mall, this was that 10-day outdoor event. Here's Jana from Minneapolis and Mai, who's a Hennepin County inspector working with us. These folks were out there every day, 8-hour shifts in the cold, inspecting, making sure people's water was working. Water, water, water. That was our big task with Super Bowl Live. Here's Dane in one of our food trucks that was on Super Bowl Live. We even had a swimming pool. And yes, that was a duly inspected swimming pool. We had a staff on site for the polar plunge the entire time. We didn't do anything about the water temperature, but it was safe. The Armory, what an amazing event that was. Beautiful, beautiful space that the Armory has become. Here's a picture of Nick, and what Nick has in his hands there is an ice wand. So this is when the inspector goes from, I'm just going to check you out because I'm the doctor, versus I'm your personal trainer. He was actually showing people, here is how you cool your food properly. And I want to share this quote with you from one of the vendors that Nick worked with. I think that says a lot about our approach. Our tailgate party, huge event, 11,000 people, primo dollar tickets here. The organization that runs the tailgate party, this is our 8th Super Bowl. A lot of resistance when we first reached out to them. I don't need to talk to the health department, don't want to be involved. At the end of her time here, you guys are the best health department I've worked with in 8 Super Bowls. Actually gave our lead inspector a hug. And so I feel like I know you guys. I feel like you're my friend now. And that, I think, is a testament to, we're a personal trainer. We're not here just to give you your physical and leave. Did you know there was a hotel suite in the U.S. Bank Stadium? It was only for Saturday night before the game. There was a contest. Courtyard Marriott had a contest. A lucky couple won. They converted one of their luxury seating suites into a luxury hotel suite. We inspected it. We inspect hotels. And then the next day, they rapidly turned it back over to a seating suite for the big game. Game day. So all that was just before the Super Bowl. Our inspectors went through with the police early in the morning, who took a bus over to U.S. Bank Stadium. Here's our team right here, Mai and Bill and Kevin and Nate and Brittany and Julia. They conducted 400 spot checks in that day. They just kept going around and around, monitoring all the food that was being prepped. Kind of cool to be at the big game, but they were exhausted after being there for 14 hours with the crowds and the noise, and really appreciate their hard work. Here, I like this picture because it's some beautiful ice sculpture, beautiful food. This was actually at the game in the Delta Club, and notice those beautiful ice sculptures. Food defense. The very first thing that was investigated by the FBI during this event was threats by a food worker that they were going to contaminate the beer of Eagles fans. And fortunately, we had really focused on food defense, knew exactly what to do. FBI investigated, and we were good. Another issue, the water tanks that were on Nicollet Mall, they were tampered with. The seals had been broken. Here's an example. Here's Jana with one of those, and you can see a seal on the water tank there. What we found out after investigating, we shut it down, we investigated. It was not intentional tampering. It was one of the employees didn't follow proper procedure. But food defense was definitely on our mind, and we were definitely proactive. Here is a quote from Fred Stevens. He's the Weapons of Mass Destruction Coordinator for the FBI Regional District. Food is considered a weapon of mass destruction Because if terrorism were to use food source to damage the population, it can get to a lot of people. So we did it. Just a few numbers for you. We did 4,600 hours on the Super Bowl. That includes all of our planning and then the operations during the event. Not bad for 25 people. 746 inspections during that 10 days by Minneapolis, about 1,000 metro-wide with all of our partners. And the biggest thing is 0 reported foodborne illnesses. It's a quote from Dr. Amidas, who's at she's our epidemiologist at Minnesota Department of Health. And here's our team. We have a number of folks here today. We have Cindy, we have Leslie and Holly and Dane and Logan and Bob and Christine, Julia, Nick, Nate, and Adam, all part of our health inspection team. Really appreciate the hard work that they did to make this a successful event. I want to end with this quote. This is high praise from Dr. Kircher. She works with governments and multinational corporations worldwide on food defense and preventing terrorism. So high praise from her. Remember that ice sculpture I told you about? Well, the seat was not the only thing that got lifted from the stadium that night. One of our inspectors snapped this picture of a jubilant Eagles fan running through the Skyway with his stolen ice sculpture. Not sure how he's going to get it on the plane. I think at that point, maybe he wasn't thinking clearly, but woohoo! So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huff. Do I have any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Gordon.
Well, thank everybody for the great work. It sounds like it was quite an effort. My only question, and maybe this is something that's going to come up in other reports, other committees, but how did we do in terms of paying for all of this extra time and effort, and where did that money come from, and how much of that was born out of just the general fund to cover the regular hours that you'd be working regularly that may have meant we weren't going somewhere else to do our regular jobs?
Mr. Chair, council member, it's a great question, and I have all my numbers on a spreadsheet, but I don't have them in my head, so I can definitely follow up with you. But basically, we had the following costs. We had our general workday costs that you mentioned, which is we're already budgeted for and paid for, but it does divert us from other things. Then we have our overtime costs, and that's a direct expense, added expense. We also had our training costs. We did a lot of training. We paid for that to make sure that folks were properly trained. And then we also had just supplies. We fed our inspectors during the operation. We did receive a little over $40,000 from the Super Bowl committee to help reimburse our costs. It didn't cover the entirety of all of our extra costs. However, as Mark Ruff, our CFO, mentioned in our enterprise-wide conversation, he is anticipating that increase in sales revenue from all the activities should help cover for that. So I would defer to our CFO on the exact, how it ended up as the cost balance at the end, but I can provide our specific information too in a follow-up email.
Yes, please go ahead.
It'll be interesting to see the spreadsheet. That would be great to send that if you can. I was also curious about if people had to get another license. So all the food vendors, and if they came from out of town and they were just setting up for this event, did they have to go through us to get a license? And were we also collecting some fees for that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Yes, if anyone was serving if they were a vendor at an event like a Nicollet Mall, they had to get a short-term food permit or a seasonal food permit. Our food trucks were already licensed. Any place that was already licensed, for example, the convention center, they already have a license with us. And so no additional license was needed there or at our hotels. For outdoor vendors, they would have to either get a catering license or a short-term food permit license.
And what about within the stadium itself? Does each different separate vendor in there get a license?
Mr. Chair, council member, no, the U.S. Bank Stadium has one license. It's under their liquor license, which covers all of the 150 or so odd food vendors that are in there.
So they pay the same amount for a license that one business would, or do they spend, is their license a lot more expensive because of all the vendors?
Mr. Chair, council member, they pay for the most expensive single establishment license, so comparable to a very large restaurant.
Do they serve the same amount of customers as a large restaurant? It seems like they might have a bigger operation.
Mr. Chair, council member, I would say that they definitely have a lot of customers. From our point of view, we inspect every single establishment as if it is its own entity. So that's why we there's 150 different places that we inspect, which is why we spend 8 inspectors 6 hours during a concert or a game day to inspect all of this.
So is that our decision that we're controlling over whether they have one license for their whole establishment, or is that somebody else in some deal that got negotiated with the stadium? Sounds like maybe it's not optimally beneficial to us or whatever.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, per staff direction from council last year, I believe you actually gave us the staff direction. Finance is preparing a fee study, which includes information on this as well as other items. So I would defer to them and their fee study and their recommendation.
Well, of course, I never have a bias when I do a staff direction, and I never take up my colleagues' time to have questions that might be leading them in any different direction. So I guess I'll rest my comments there.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how much of a resounding success this aspect of the work for the Super Bowl was, because there were no reports. Didn't make the news. It's one of those things where it's like, if you do your job really well, nobody talks about it. And so I want to take the time to talk about it and say thank you all so much. Those numbers are really big for the amount of work in a short period of time, a small, relatively small group of folks for the level of scale, the partnerships that were built, the collaborations that were made. I just have to say, phenomenal work, everyone. Although you may not have made the news, you are recognized and seen for all of the hard work and time that you put into it. So thank you very much for your leadership in this. And I am grateful that the city has such hardworking employees who make sure that not only are the residents safe, but folks who come to visit our city as well are. So thank you. Are there any, Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham and Mr. Huff, for that great presentation, and to all of your staff for the amazing work that you guys did. I echo Council Member Cunningham's comments. I'm curious, so the couple that stayed overnight at the U.S. Bank Stadium, they didn't get to watch the game the next day from their hotel room?
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, my understanding was, as part of the contest, then they get to watch the game once it was converted back to seating. I actually did not meet them. I wasn't there with them, but that was what I heard.
Okay. It'd be nice to, lay in bed and watch the game and,
From the skybox.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions from my colleagues, thank you so much, Mr. Huff. I would like to move to receive and file this item. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item is received and filed. Before we wrap up, I just want to make an announcement that our next regularly scheduled meeting on May 14th will include public hearings for the reappointment of Health Commissioner Gretchen Musicant and the Tobacco 21 ordinance, as well as a presentation on the next step for Neighborhoods 2020. I just want to make a note to community members, if you are unable to make it and would like to submit a comment to be included in the public hearing, please send an email to councilcomment@minneapolismn.gov or contact your council member and ask for your comment to be included in the public comments. Seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.